I want everybody to stop dying.
That was then presidential candidate Donald Trump, now the president-elect, at St. Anselm College in Manchester, New Hampshire, in May of last year.
They're dying, Russians and Ukrainians. I want them to stop dying. And I'll have that done. I'll have that done in 24 hours. I'll have it done. You need the power of the presidency to do it.
It was part of a CNN town hall with the former and soon-to-be president. Although his office expressed some skepticism about the timetable earlier this week, Russia's president, Vladimir Putin, said he was willing to talk.
The desire to restore relations with Russia, to help bring the Ukrainian crisis to an end, I think that deserves attention at the very least.
Well, for more on all that, we go to Moscow to speak with analyst Mark Sleboda. Hello, Mark. What do you think?
Don, thanks for having me. One of the most glaring campaign rhetoric promises that Trump made during his election campaign is that he would end the war in Ukraine in 24 hours. He would bring peace in 24 hours. So once he became president. Now, I don't know at what time the clock officially starts on that 24 hours. Was it from the election? Was it from his inauguration?
Right.
It's, so evidently Trump is going to wave his magic wand. And it's a really big wand. It's huge. It's so big, right? And all the problems are going to go away. And Russians and Banderite Ukrainians are all going to sing Kumbaya and dance together. And that this is just a prelude, of course, to Trump solving the issue of peace in the Middle East and bringing peace to an area of the world that's been at war for decades now, to one degree or another. Yeah. Back in the real world. We're already hearing in the pages of the Financial Times, the Wall Street Journal, others, plans that are being circulated by Trump surrogates, past and present, by like Mike Pompeo, anonymous people within the Trump campaign, now I guess the transition team, of their plans for Ukraine, for ending the conflict, and they've discussed all kinds of things. It just seems no one's talking to the Russians, and no one's talking to the Ukrainians or the Kiev regime at least either, and no one really seems to care what they want. And I hate to tell you, but neither the Russians or the Ukrainians care what Trump wants either. I mean, at the end of the day. I mean, of course, they're both going to listen to him and both maybe even butter him up and flatter him a bit, but neither are going to agree to the U.S. terms. Both the Kiev regime and Russia have their own maximalist turns, towards what a peace at the end of this conflict would be. The only real distinction is that Russia is actually winning on the battlefield, right? And it has to be said that the U.S. is a party to this conflict, whether they like to admit it or not, and they're on the losing side. And Trump is the president of the United States, and he doesn't get to dictate terms to Russia, right? Whether peace or anything else. So, I mean, what they're talking is a ceasefire, a freeze of the conflict, then creating some kind of buffer zone where European troops get brought in to police it, right? The same Europeans that have been killing Russians, and right. Russians been killing, on the quiet for the last 3 years, whether as mercenaries or whatever, and that Russia would get to temporarily keep the territory they have now, but Ukraine would try to take it back in a few years, and we'll keep pumping Ukraine full of arms so that Russia didn't invade again, quote unquote. And everyone in Moscow is saying, why would we agree to this? Why? I mean, okay, yeah. So this is Trump's deal. No, just not interested. Sorry. conflict continues.
Materially, what you're talking about is, okay, since we're getting our behind kicked so thoroughly right now, and we can't produce enough ammunition and other things to do a war of attrition, which is what we were trying to win. Let's get a freeze, build up our reserves, get ourselves positioned even better, and then start it over again. And Russia's saying, no.
Yeah, that's certainly what some of the people on the Trump team are thinking. Whether that's in Trump's head or not is, a matter of conjecture. But Russia's not going to agree to that. They've already dictated that they're always happy to engage in negotiations, in diplomacy. They're always happy to talk, but that their terms are adamant. They haven't changed except to get harder, right, from the beginning of the conflict. And there will be no ceasefire. Russians have no interest in a ceasefire. Why would they? Give the Kiev regime more time for the West to rearm it and retrain it and to conscript more people? No.
I mean, you could say that this action that they took in the beginning of February of last year, or whatever, in 2022, was exactly because the preparation for war was so thoroughly out of balance in favor of NATO already that Russia had acquiesced to for one reason or another, that they said, we can't tolerate any further positioning of men, material, etc. We're going to stop, push back now. And so, of course, they wouldn't do it again.
Yeah, they're not going. Russia does not want to fight this war again a few years down the road. Whether during the Trump administration, during J.D. Vance's administration, or whoever the next president is, they're not interested in that. They want this settled. Whatever the resolution is at the end of it, whether it's some big, Eurasian common security architecture plan work or just a frozen conflict, whatever, it will be on Russia's terms, not the U.S. terms. Donald Trump doesn't get to dictate terms, and he's blustered. It has to be said, the Kiev regime has no interest in a peace settlement at this point either. They haven't accepted that they've been beat yet, and they intend to go on fighting with or without U.S. support. The Europeans still say they're going to support them. Certainly some European powers will. And the Banderites that suffuse the Kiev regime's armed forces and their political structures and the security services, they certainly would not accept any terms but their maximalist ones. They would regard that as a capitulation and a surrender to Russia. And if Zelensky was inclined to consider it, which he's not, apparently, he's fully internalized all of this and is just as delusional, but they would kill him. Right. I mean, that would be the situation. The Banderites would kill him. But I don't think it actually will come to that, because I don't think Zelensky is mentally there either. His own people told the Time magazine that he's delusional, that he is an emperor without clothes. You can't tell him that they're losing the conflict. So Kiev doesn't want Trump's deal. Russia doesn't want Trump's deal. The majority of both houses of Congress, in which there's bipartisan support for this conflict, other than Trump and a handful of his own closest people, they don't want an end to this conflict except on their own terms, which no one has achieved yet, and they're unlikely to achieve them. So this conflict will go on. It is almost a certainty. And the only question is, what happens when Putin, tells Trump no, right? You will have the neocons and close to Trump, and they're already talking about bringing Mike Rubio in as Secretary of State, Mark Rubio, and Mike Pompeo in as Secretary of Defense. They will say, well, in order to get Russia to agree to your terms, you're going to have to show strength. We're going to have to escalate to de-escalate, right? And Trump has already promised to flood Ukraine with so many weapons, right? That's what he said. And Russia's just like, oh, really? What weapons are you going to flood them with that they can use? Because if Joe Biden had any more weapons that he could have flooded them with, he would.
He's trying, actually.
Yeah. Trump has in other places recognized that the U.S. doesn't have enough artillery shells for this conflict. It's not making enough. It doesn't have any stockpiles. It doesn't have enough air defense interceptor missiles and other vital munitions for this type of land-centric, artillery-heavy war of attrition in Eurasia. They're not geared up for it. So that is a toothless bluff, right? And just like putting NATO troops on the ground, right? Because if the NATO doesn't have enough armaments to supply their Kiev regime proxies, they certainly don't have enough to arm 300,000 or 400,000 troops, which is still only half of what Russia has on the ground in Ukraine, right? Some 800,000. So this is whatever threats, whatever bluff, whatever bluster they intend to try to force Russia to accept their deal on their terms. It doesn't frighten Russia. Russia just gonna keep on carrying on with the special military operation until it achieves and realizes all of its goals.
On that, as a matter of fact, and as quick as you can put it together because we're getting close to time. The reality of it is that what Russia absolutely needs and seeks is a space to maintain its own national integrity, in essence, sovereignty, to develop in the way that it will, without outside interference or pressure. And the question is really, is the United States, let's say the United States, willing to allow this to happen? In other words, will the United States respect the fact that Russia is in charge of its own territory and is not going to allow meddling inside its country with attempts to take down the government and all these other things, and certainly not going to allow an external military positioning to act in tandem with that effort? Will they recognize Russia's right to exist as a sovereign state or not? That's really the question.
No, I don't think they can, and they will. I mean, Trump is still the president of the United States, is still the president of the global hegemon. And the fact that it's Trump doesn't change that. And whether you call it the blob, as Ben Rhodes did, the foreign policy elite, whether you call it the deep state or the permanent bureaucracy, they are the ones who really dictate U.S. foreign and military policy. They present the president with a very limited range of options within the scope of that hegemony. And we saw Trump. We have already seen a first Trump administration, and we've seen how that has gone. And the campaign to improve relations with Russia then became the worst relations with Russia the worst relations between the U.S. and Russia since the end of the Cold War. Under Trump up until that time, right? Obviously, it's worsened since then, but that's just the flow of events.
Yep.
Campaign rhetoric is all well and good, but Trump, the U.S. is a party to this conflict. It does have hegemonic interests in Ukraine, and it is losing. But there's no deal that Trump can give Putin that would be acceptable to the U.S. deep state, right? That Russia would accept. That's the terms. That's the reality of the situation. And however much Trump might like to extricate himself from this, and try to paint it as Biden's war, I think he's going to find that it's a lot more difficult than he thought it might be.
Let's get the popcorn out and keep our eyes open. Mark, thank you so much for your time. We'll speak with you again.
Thanks for having me.
For KPFK, I'm Don DeBar.